Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's Coffee with Craig, where we talk about all things firearms, firearms policy, politics, culture, media, you name it. We're talking about it right here on Coffee with Craig. So please take a moment, like and share the program so that your friends can join in the conversation. Also, if you haven't already done so, please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook. And in both cases, hit the notification button so that you can get the alerts as soon as we go live and you can participate in the live chat. Finally, make it a point. Once again, if you haven't done so this week, make sure you go to fpcgear.com. That's fpcgear.com. Cool place to go to find all sorts of Pro 2A swag, t-shirts, coffee mugs, hoodies. They're all there. And the best part is every dollar that you spend goes right back into the fight for our right to keep and bear arms. So you can support the Second Amendment and you can look good doing it. That's fpcgear.com. As you can see, we're still here in Washington, D.C., fighting for your right to keep and bear arms. And as I've said before, if we're not fighting on Capitol Hill or fighting in the White House, and if we're not successful there, then the next step is, guess what? It's right here at the Supreme Court. Now, there's one case that we wanted to share with you and kind of talk a little bit about with you guys, and that is our bump stock case. And with that, we have our attorney on this case, Mr. Erik Jaffe, with us this morning to kind of clarify exactly where the case is and exactly what we're arguing in the case. So, Mr. Jaffe, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Excellent, excellent. So, do me a favor, just kind of lay out real quick for the audience what the basic case is and then kind of where we're at right now.
Sure. So the basic case says that for years, ATF has thought of bump stocks, certain types of bump stocks, the manual bump stocks, as not converting a semi-automatic weapon into a machine gun. But following events in Las Vegas, which people suspected involved bump stocks, the president instructed ATF to reconsider its long-standing interpretation and issue a new interpretation that would call those things machine guns and therefore effectively make them illegal, make it a felony to possess them. ATF did that on demand, and we promptly challenged, we being Mr. Gaddis, the FPF, FPC in a separate challenge, and other groups as well, promptly challenged that, claiming that it was a misinterpretation of the statute that defined what a machine gun was. We lost at the trial court, though the trial court agreed at least that it was ambiguous, that the government was not clearly right. We thought the government was clearly wrong, but the trial court thought it was a close call, or at least up in the air, and then gave the government the win. The Court of Appeals once again decided that it was ambiguous, the language in the definition was ambiguous, but gave the government the win using a doctrine called Chevron deference.
Okay, now, do me a favor real quick and explain a little bit about what Chevron deference is and how that is different than how it should have been applied in this particular case.
Sure. So a while back in a case called Chevron versus National Resources Defense Council, the Supreme Court decided that if a statute wasn't clear, if the language in a law was unclear, that we really should let the administrative agency that deals with that law decide what the best answer is, rather than have the courts decide what the best interpretation of that law is. That was a bit of a change. Usually courts, if something's unclear, they do the best that they can and come up with what they think the best interpretation is. This shifted the power over to administrative agencies. And ever since then, it has been a very controversial topic in legal circles about whether that is abdicating the court's role to decide what the law is and shifting too much power to administrative agencies. And this case is an example of that, where an administrative agency takes a law that was unclear, and instead of finding the best answer, they come up with an answer they like, and then the courts just say, well, that's all that we have to worry about. As long as it's unclear, you win. And particularly in the criminal context, that's deeply troubling. There's a more traditional rule that says if it's unclear in the criminal context, we go for the more lenient version, not the harsher version.
Right. So now, and the interesting thing about it is I think for people who understand firearms, when you read it, it's not unclear. There's clear things in terms of the definitions when it comes to those who are involved and know and understand firearms. And literally what it sounds like they did was they redefined those terms in order to fit the definition of a bump stock.
I think that's exactly right. Look, I think if you read those terms, particularly in the context of the laws of which they are a part, in the context of historical opinions by the ATF, and then Congress's reenacting the laws after those opinions, I personally think the ATF's argument is frivolous. I think there's no way that the law covers these kinds of bump stocks. However, we don't need to go that far to win this case. What matters for this case is that at the end of the day, even the courts below agreed that, well, whether or not we're right, the ATF certainly wasn't clearly right, so that it's somewhere in a gray area. And once you get to a gray area, traditional rules of statutory interpretation suggest that it should have gone against the ATF, and that owners of bump stocks shouldn't suddenly become felons because the ATF changed its mind.
Well, exactly. I mean, think about it. If the law is ambiguous, shouldn't you err on the side of protecting the individual who may potentially either have to pay a fine or actually have to do jail time as a result of possession or the commission of that now crime if you're going to redefine it. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but last I watched the Schoolhouse Rock. Laws are written in the legislative branch, not in the executive branch, and this just seems to be a clear example, or at least, well, I guess as far as the courts have been concerned so far, not totally clear, of an overreach in that area.
Absolutely. There's both the concern for the individuals who might have bump stocks and in terms of fairness towards them, but there's this more overarching concern that you mentioned about who gets to make laws like this and what happens when the law wasn't clear or a new situation arises. Does the executive branch, does the prosecutor get to decide what is and isn't illegal, or do you have to have Congress make that choice at the end of the day? And we think for good traditional reasons of separation of powers and the structure of government under the Constitution, that choice has to be made by Congress, not by executive branch agencies like the Department of Justice or the ATF.
Right. Exactly. In some cases, you have well-meaning justices or well-meaning folks in the executive who honestly don't really know or understand the technology, and they're determining some of these things are ambiguous, when really those who are involved and know and understand know that they're not. But then you do have, and I'm not saying that is the case here, but you do have in some cases bad actors who know and recognize that the average person doesn't understand or doesn't know firearms and seeks to get around having to go through the legislative process in order to implement something that, probably should have gone through the legislative process.
Well, I would go so far as to impugn the motives of the individuals involved as opposed to the structural incentives on different branches of government.
Right.
So there's no question that there was a hue and cry to do something in the wake of Las Vegas. And it's just a question of which branch of government is going to do it, which is going to get credit for it, which is going to pass the blame for it. And in this instance, there's obviously a tension between the executive branch and Congress as to who gets credit for fixing the problem. And so one could imagine the executive branch jumped in here, told Congress not to worry about it, that they would take care of it in order to both save Congress perhaps from having to have the fight and also to get credit for any fix that might have gone in. Whether those are good reasons, bad reasons, natural politics, I'm not going to impugn them per se, but they're just not the way government's supposed to work.
Exactly.
It undermines accountability, it undermines democracy, and while to the government's credit, they made sure to do this in a very public way, and I give them all credit for that so that no one gets surprised by this as best as possible, it still doesn't make it right. It's not their job, it's Congress's job.
Right. And folks, even whether or not you care about bump stocks, or whether or not you care about firearms at all, this is about good government. And if we are going to allow the process to be, I don't want to say misused, but if we're going to allow a faulty process to allow something to be banned that we may or may not care about, then what's to keep it from happening in the future to an item or to a right or to a process that we in fact do care about? That's the reason why it's important that we stop. This isn't even really about firearms or bump stocks. This is about good government.
Exactly right. I mean, firearms and bump stocks happen to be the example in this case, but the issues underlying it, the Chevron issues, the how do you interpret criminal law issues, how do you expand ambiguous criminal law issues, those apply to everyone. Those apply to citizens, those apply to businesses, all kinds of businesses who face criminal prosecution for environmental laws, food and drug laws, securities laws. They have to be worried about an administrative agency that decides, well, the law wasn't clear, so I'm going to take the aggressive version and go after this company or this executive. These are problems that face all of us, that face all sorts of businesses, regardless of what particular field the law happens to be in. Here it happens to be bump stocks, but it's really a universal problem in terms of interpreting the law and who gets to write the laws.
Well, Erik, thank you so much for the work that you're doing for us. We very much appreciate you. We're all wishing you much luck and prayers going forward. Folks, it's important that we support this effort. Now, this effort is not Firearms Policy Coalition. We had a separate lawsuit. This is different. This is Firearms Policy Foundation. This is our sister organization that we work with. Please make sure there's a link in the description of this video. Please make sure to go there. You can read about the lawsuit, get a little bit more detail. You actually read the briefs that have been filed, as well as you have an opportunity to donate in order to help support the effort. Anyway, folks, that's going to be it for today's Coffee with Craig. We very much appreciate you guys tuning in. We appreciate you liking and sharing this program, telling your friends about the Firearms Policy Coalition. We are the home in the fight for civil rights. Got to use them or you're going to lose them. You guys take care.
If you like our videos, follow, subscribe, like, and share.